Hello, I'm Charles Musgrove with Bean Team and host of Business Matters. We're back in studio today for our second episode on insurance. We've got Craig McGlynn with the Brad Burns Insurance Agency. He is the insurance expert that we have in the house today. Craig, thanks for sticking around for episode number 2.
My pleasure.
First one was great. If you missed it, check it out on YouTube podcast. You will enjoy it. So Craig is in the house. We're going to talk about EPLI insurance today. We're going to talk about workers' comp, and then we're going to get into some property insurance as it relates to coastal versus non-coastal and kind of some complex stuff that we have to deal with in the state of Florida since we have all these great storms that we have to deal with. So can really that can be a real cost to your property ownership is the insurance and where your property is located. So looking forward to that. And like all of our shows, we have great subject matter experts that come in and talk to us, and today is no exception. We've got Craig is here, and he's really he's going to bring some 30 years of experience to us and bring us stuff that we need to know to run our business better and to make sure we're insured. So just like with the discussion we had about cyber insurance, the employee practices liability insurance is critical. That's a piece of insurance that I would say most businesses need to have. If not, they certainly need to consider whether they should have it or not. So your insurance agent, like Craig, somebody that does their job well, they're going to be talking to you about EPLI insurance. They're going to talk to you about cyber. They're going to talk to you about business interruption. They're going to make sure that they understand your business so that they match up the coverage with the risk that's associated with the business. So with that, this is information you're getting on the pre-roll, the podcast, and YouTube. We're going to go right into the recording for the radio show, which is Real Talk 93.3 every Sunday morning at 11:30 a.m. So when you're coming out of church, turn on the Real Talk 93.3. Check us out if you want to hear it fresh every Sunday. Otherwise, go to podcast, YouTube. And with that, I'm going to say, John, bring us in with some music, and we'll get the show started.
Welcome to the Business Matters Talk Show with Charles Musgrove. On Business Matters, we discuss the issues that matter to your business. Find more episodes on Apple Podcast, YouTube, and BeanTeam.com. And now here's your host, Charles Musgrove.
Welcome back, and thank you so much. And hey, we got another great episode of Business Matters. I am Charles Musgrove, your host. Today we've got some more nuggets of knowledge that you're going to want to stick around for. We've got Craig McGlynn with the Brad Burns Insurance Agency. He is back in the house today talking insurance. It's something everybody needs. Insurance, you got to have the right coverage. In episode number 1, we talked about cyber insurance, business interruption insurance. Talk to your agent about your insurance coverage to make sure you've got the right stuff in place to protect you for the loss. So you may have a loss. You want to make sure that you're covered when it does happen. Good insurance agents, we got the best in-house today. Craig, thank you for coming back.
My pleasure.
We had a good time on the first show. Today we're gonna touch on some insurance coverages that we did not get to in the first episode, but they're just as important. These may be even more important than the ones we talked about before. They're at least as important. So let's talk first about EPLI insurance, employee practices liability insurance.
Employment practices liability insurance is going to cover wrongful hiring, firing, age, race, sex discrimination. If one of your employees turns around and sues you, you have no coverage anywhere other than an employment practices liability policy.
So I have had the unfortunate circumstance to work with clients that have had employee issues where they've come under litigation from the employee, and the attorney, the first thing they always want to know is, do you have EPLI insurance? So that's almost like the first line of defense, that if you have EPLI insurance, most of the times they'll cover the cost of defense.
Absolutely.
they have a lot of exceptions and exclusions built into those policies, at least from what I've seen, that they may defend you, but they may not pay out if you're found to be at fault.
Correct.
So a lot of that, as you know, and I've seen through the eyes of others, is the defense cost can be rather staggering.
Absolutely.
So just to have that EPLI coverage in place is a tremendous benefit. And there, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a deductible involved in an EPLI coverage.
There is. It's referred to as self-retention, which in layman's term is a deductible. And it's generally going to be somewhere in the $10,000 range. So the first $10,000 of any claim is going to be the responsibility of the policy holder. And then from that point on, the insurance company is going to pick it up and pay up to the limit of the policy. Now, you brought up defense cost. Defense cost is in addition to the policy limits, with the exception of one profession, which attorneys, if they purchase an EPLI policy, defense cost is actually included in the limits.
Interesting. Is that because they're defend themselves?
Not necessarily. Not usually. Usually the insurance company is going to provide somebody for them for their defense. That's
what I've seen also. The insurance companies, they typically already have an arrangement with a law firm that's going to provide that defense.
That's correct. So the one thing that you got to be cognizant of when you're talking about employment practices liability, it's one of the only areas in the United States where you're guilty until proven innocent, because it doesn't matter what your intention was when you said something to a person. It only matters what their feelings were.
The receiving end of that is what matters.
Correct.
So really, if let's talk generalities here, that EPLI policy is going to cover you for those areas where there's it's in the gray area, so that the
Correct.
person saying or doing there was no ill intent. The person receiving, they received ill intent. So there's a disagreement there that's litigated.
That is correct.
It's not something that's abusive, or there's a clear wrongdoing on one part.
It can be that also.
So there would be coverage for that.
Absolutely.
So in most of the coverage, would there be an exclusion for that? So let's say that there's guilt that comes out of that. Is there still coverage?
Unless it's going to be a commission, you commit a crime by what you're doing, it's generally going to pay. The policy is. So, and the same thing like the cyber liability, there's first and third party. So if your people interact with outside people, you really want to concern yourself with having an employment practices liability. An employment practices liability policy.
So in that case, that is not just employer-employee type coverage. That the EPLI also covers you if your employees, your people, interact with the outside world.
Correct. You have a restaurant and they're waiting on a patron. The patron feels that there was some slur involved in it. You want to make sure that that's covered.
Right. So I guess the coverage, how much does that person do that's still covered? And you said even to the point of they may be determined guilty of a crime, and the policy would still cover that.
Now, if it's a crime, they're going to deny the claim.
Oh, they will deny the claim.
Correct.
Okay, I misunderstood that. That makes sense. So if they are adjudicated as guilty of a crime, then the policy is going to exclude that, which makes sense.
Standard exclusion, commission of a felony. Sorry.
Right.
No coverage.
Did they, in that case, let's assume that they've covered the defense cost. They're not going to go back and try to recapture that defense cost.
No, they shouldn't.
Okay. So the defense cost would be covered, but once the jury or the judge says you're guilty, then you're on your own for the payment of that.
Correct.
All right. Interesting. So regardless, EPLI coverage is, let's say it's there to protect the innocent.
Correct.
So that's a coverage that every employer needs to have.
That is correct.
Okay. And the cost of that, so I don't know if we got into the cost, but how is the premium for that determined?
It's going to be dependent upon how many employees you have and what the percentage turnover in both management as well as staff.
So that's more of it's not based on the revenue of the company.
No.
It's typically based on number of employees and
Correct.
kind of the turnover and probably the nature of the business as well.
Correct.
All right. So what are we looking at for a company with less than 50 employees and just say normal, whatever normal is, turnover?
Again, it's going to be comparable to what the cyber is. White collar, less than 50 employees, you're probably looking somewhere in the $1,000-$1,500 range.
Okay. So $1,500 for
$1 million worth of
$1 million worth of coverage.
Correct.
For probably 50 employees or less is kind of
Correct.
what you're looking at there. Okay, so that's not a terribly expensive coverage that you need to have for your business.
Correct.
I guess the bad side of that is we're having a $1,500 here, $2,000 there, $3,000 there. So individually, those policy premiums are not a lot, but when you add all those together of what you need, it becomes a pretty sizable number.
Yeah, I mean, if you had unlimited resources, I guarantee I can make you bulletproof, but it's all a matter of what I'm willing to bear as far as the risk goes.
Right. Now, EPLI, I would say that's one of those coverages that you really need to have that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about EPLI insurance. So let's touch on workers' comp. I know that's I get that question a lot. Do I need to have workers' comp? What's the cutoff as far as number of employees before I have to have workers' comp insurance? If I'm a contractor, if I'm a general contractor versus a roofer, there's a difference there also. So educate us on workers' comp.
Okay. So when you talk workers' compensation, you got to decide first off whether you're in the construction industry or you're non-construction industry. The construction industry, if you have an employee, you have to carry workers' compensation insurance. Owners, officers of an LLC or a corporation, up to 3 of them can exempt themselves if you're in the construction industry.
Only in construction.
Construction.
All right, so tell me, what do you normally recommend with owners that say they want to exempt themselves from workers' comp coverage?
Well, workers' compensation covers a lot of things. Under Part A of the workers' compensation, it's zero deductible, unlimited lifetime maximum health insurance for injuries that occur on the job. It also pays 66 2/3 of your average 13-week earnings, so you got disability included on there also. And if you have the misfortune of dying on the job, there's a $150,000 death benefit.
All right, so I'm not an insurance agent.
Okay.
I don't sell insurance.
Right.
But I always recommend for owners to make sure they're covered. They don't exempt themselves from workers' comp coverage just because of what you just said. And typically the cost of that is minimal.
Especially if they're the outside salesperson, it's a totally different rate than the roofer
Exactly.
that's actually up on there. So you're talking 47 cents or 45 cents per $100 worth of income that you're paying workers' compensation on if you're the sales guy.
Right.
So, and generally the owner of the business, why wouldn't you insure the golden goose?
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of those things that they're trying to save pennies, and it may cost them just a ton of money.
Well, the other thing is, if they're in the construction industry, disability coverage is a tough thing to come by.
Right.
Most health insurance has an exclusion for work-related injuries. So if they get injured, that's going to put that business out.
So walk this with me. If an employee is working on the job and they trip and fall, whether they're at their place of business or whether they're at a client's place of business, regardless of where they are, if they injure themselves, trip and fall, whatever, paper cut, that's covered under workers' comp.
That workers' compensation is your primary coverage. A lot of people get confused. Hey, my guy was in a car accident and was injured. Workers' comp is still going to be the primary coverage for it, even though there's personal injury protection on the commercial auto policy.
Right. So you could have both policies in play on that. So you've got an automobile that's going to fix the car, and you've got the workers' comp that's going to take care of the employee.
Correct.
Would the workers' comp ever extend to a non-employee?
No.
Okay, so
Well,
if they're an uninsured
subcontractor
on your job site or in your business, then they would.
They will, but so when you do a workers' compensation audit, which a workers' comp policy is going to have an audit done every year, and if there's an uninsured sub, they're going to be included on your workers' compensation premium when they do the calculation.
Will an audit be required, or do audits happen even under the self-reporting every period?
Yep.
So they still come in to look for, not necessarily did you underreport the payroll, but did you include all of the uninsured subs that you employed as well?
That is correct.
Okay. What about general liability? So if that employee trips and falls in your business, then the workers' comp is going to cover that injury.
Right. What's going to end up happening, though, is if it was an actual liability that you've got a plumber who comes to your place of work, trips over a box that you left sitting in the aisle that wasn't there when he came in, workers' compensation is going to pay, but they're probably going to subrogate against the general liability at your office.
Right. So that's different than if I'm a contractor. If I have a law office or my accounting firm, and I've got a client that comes in or a visitor, and they trip and fall, my general liability policy is going to cover that, not my workers' comp policy.
Correct.
Okay. If I'm a contractor and I'm building a building and I employ a subcontractor that does not have workers' comp insurance, he gets injured, that's going to fall to me.
Correct.
On my workers' comp policy.
Well, actually, it's going to go under your liability policy. So most of the apartment complexes here in Tallahassee, they have very stringent insurance requirements, one of which is, hey, nobody works out here with an exemption. The reason for that is if you get a plumber, for example, that's legal, he's got his LLC, he's got a general liability policy, he's got an exemption for workers' compensation. He comes to your house, he blows his back out under your sink, he's going to file a claim against your general liability. And there is nothing you can do about it. He has willfully given up his right to be covered by workers' compensation. As a matter of fact, he paid $50 for the exemption for a 2-year time period, but he's going to file a claim against your general liability insurance, which is all the apartment complexes know that. That's why they say nobody with an exemption works out here.
Yeah. So one more reason, stay away from the exemptions for workers' comp.
Correct.
All right, good. So we do have the knowing which policy comes into play. So if my employee goes to a client's business and they trip and fall for a wet floor or the box that was left in the hallway, that's filed on the client's general liability policy.
Can be. First thing they're going to do is say, hey, I was working when I went there, so that should be workers' compensation.
Okay. If let's say there's a dog involved, so you go to a client's office and the employee gets bit by the client's dog.
Oh. First off, don't take your dogs to the office. That's a nightmare claim. I actually dealt with one of those at a construction site. Guy had his dog on a chain, came out, and bit my client on the leg as he was coming to give a bid.
So what policy covered that? Was it his general liability policy?
So what ended up happening on that one is the workers' compensation paid primary on it and then turned around and subrogated and collected so that his mod was safe from the injury on the thing. They were able to get the money back from the general liability of the guy who had the dog.
Right. Okay. Which would seem normal that it would go against the dog owner's liability policy.
The insurance company, workers' compensation is going to be primary regardless, so you file it there, but then the insurance company did the right thing, got the money back, so that my guy, because it was about a $68,000 claim, his workers' comp mod would have gone through the roof.
Right.
So,
Man, that's good that they did that. How did they work that out between the two parties? Was it the insurance companies that did that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That the client didn't have to do anything other than, hey, I was repaired, and keeping them informed with what was going on with the claim. Hey, by the way, we were able to subrogate, and so your loss runs don't look like you
Good,
had a big
good.
claim on it.
All right, well, that makes sense. That's probably an isolated incident, but even in that case, it would have affected the mod rate pretty dramatically.
Indeed.
Okay, so we've talked about EPLI insurance, workers' comp insurance.
Actually, you had asked the question. I started with construction industry
Right.
workers' comp because non-construction is a little bit different. Who has to carry workers' compensation? So until you have a total of 4 employees, including owners, officers, you do not have to carry workers' compensation, non-construction industry. Now, having said that, if you're not carrying workers' compensation, say you're a small retail shop, 2 owners, maybe a part-time employee, you probably ought to still consider carrying workers' compensation because it's so inexpensive for what the exposure is out there. If you're not carrying workers' compensation and your employee is injured, you are responsible for providing the same benefits they would have received.
So there's no other, that doesn't fall to the general liability. That comes out of you directly.
Correct.
And all of that is regulated by the insurance department of the state of Florida.
Correct.
So if you choose not to get that coverage and the employee is injured on the job, then you've got to pay for that. That's like you have no all of it's deductible is coming out of your pocket.
Correct.
So that can be tremendously expensive.
Yeah, I mean, if you're having to provide for the medical payments as well as ongoing income, 66 2/3 of their average 13 weeks, that's a huge amount of money. When you're looking at, hey, I could have paid $200 or $300 for a workers' compensation policy.
That leads to another question. So I always get that question too. So if the small companies that they're evaluating, just like the example you listed, you talked about. So it's the small retail. They could opt out. There is a legal exemption for them not to have workers' comp insurance. So what is for that company? What's the minimum amount of cost of that workers' comp policy?
Well, the
You
rates,
said $200 or $300. That seems really inexpensive.
well, the rates in the state of Florida are set by the state.
Right. So those rates are all regulated. So if you're a new company,
Correct.
you're going to have a mod rate of
1.0, and depending on what the class code is. So if the person's coming in and they're a part-time bookkeeper for you, that's going to be a clerical class code that's 20 cents per $100 worth of payroll. You pay the person $20,000 a year. You know, you got $40 is what, subject to a minimum premium of $200 or $300.
So there is a minimum premium. So you can get policies that cheap?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Less than $500.
Oh, true.
Wow. That's good to know. But
Depending
that's
on
for
the class code.
Exactly. So that goes back to the qualifier there is the class code. So if you're an 8810, which would be that clerical, you're going to be very inexpensive.
Correct.
If you go to the more expensive stuff where your feet are off the ground, you're climbing ladders, you're in a warehouse driving a forklift, then your rates are going to be different. So you're probably back to the $1,500 to $3,000 range.
So there's officer minimums also. So when you're talking, there's a construction industry and there's a non-construction industry.
Right.
And for 2020, it's the equivalent of $500 a week for construction industry, $900 a week non-construction industry. So when you're looking at it, if you're a painting contractor, and I'm going to do the officer minimum on there, the coverage for you, you're probably looking $2,000 to $3,000 for you to be covered on the policy instead of getting an exemption. But if you're not carrying a health insurance policy that doesn't cover 24 hours, or you don't have a disability policy, or you don't have a life insurance policy, you probably ought to buy it.
Absolutely. Think about that. So you're going to get workers' comp coverage for, you said $2,000 to $3,000. If all of you that's been in the market for health insurance, a good health insurance policy, you're going to pay at least $1,000 for $1,000 a month is going to be cheap for your health insurance.
Yeah.
So that not that we're trying to replace health insurance with workers' comp, but your point is well taken that gives you a lot of coverage for really not a lot of money.
Correct.
If you do a comparison there to health insurance. So that's good information. Those are questions that I get frequently on do I have to have workers' comp coverage? It depends on the industry you're in. Construction, the default answer there is if you've got employees, if you got a construction business, yes, you got to have workers' comp insurance.
Correct.
How do they police that?
Oh, absolutely. I was actually on the phone with a guy from the Division of Workers' Compensation Enforcement today.
Do they carry guns?
They don't carry the guns. The ones that do the fraud investigation, they do actually carry guns.
Okay, so if they're doing, and this is in the construction industry, they'll do they ever do job site inspections where they may do a raid?
Yeah, well, they drive up to a place. They'll drive around town looking for construction going on, and if you're not carrying workers' compensation, don't have a policy in force, when they come out, the fines start flying at that point in time.
Right.
And a stop work order.
Yeah, so they'll issue the stop work order. They are trying to, it looks like they're trying to get money, but they're really trying to protect those people that are out there on the job site. And
correct.
There's corners that can be cut. That's a way they can deter those corners from being cut by doing random on-site inspections to see if the coverage is in place.
That's correct.
It's not a very friendly situation. Even if you've got coverage, nobody likes to go through that. So yeah, that's great information to know about workers' comp. It is like a lot of the insurance. I'll say all the insurance, you need to rely on smart people, good people that are looking out for your best interest, and those agents that really understand the business that you're in, the business risk that you're taking on, so that they can put those policies in place to best mitigate that risk. Craig, it's been a great session we've had today. Another great episode of Business Matters. You've made it great. Thank you so much for joining us for the second episode on insurance. I'm Charles Musgrove, your host of Business Matters. Thank you for joining us. I want you to have a great day, a blessed week. Come back and listen next week. Real Talk 93.3, Sunday at 11:30. Peace and love.
The Business Matters Talk Show with Charles Musgrove is sponsored by the Bean Team. For all your business accounting and tax preparation needs, visit beanteam.com or call 893-7710. You can listen to more episodes of Business Matters on Apple Podcast, YouTube, or visit beanteam.com.